Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we have a very special edition of the Nightly News Podcast here on episode 103. Today's podcast will focus on the 100th podcast celebration that we had at the Boyer House at the end of August, and where we inducted two very special members and contributors, if you will, to the Nightly News into the first ever class of the Nightly News Hall of Fame. When we decided to do this, we wanted to have a nice celebration, and we wanted to invite many of the people down to campus who have had a significant impact on what we've done with the Nightly News. The first person that we had here was Norm Geary, and Norm joined us on the podcast during the event after the event had concluded. Norm, over the years, was such an important part of the Nightly News, and in fact, he was one of the first few original members that really made a significant impact here on campus. Not only was he the first person that we considered a news correspondent and actually did a news talk show on several occasions, Norm also became a mentor to many other people and Nightly News Club members over his time here at the college. We thought it'd definitely be very important to have Norm be part of this first inaugural class, especially with his efforts on the news programs and also our work with the Nasir Harris documentary release that happened with that and of course, Nasir's family. Norm, over the years, was one of the most influential people in the Nightly News Media Club, and we were really happy to have him here for the inauguration into the Nightly News Hall of Fame. So, what will come following this introduction is our interview with Norm Geary after he had been awarded the Nightly News Hall of Fame. Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we are here today celebrating our 100th episode of the podcast. So I am going to have a couple of people today who happen to join us during the festivities back on August the 29th. So I know that these are a little old, but I wanted to make sure that we brought some of our most important members back onto the show. So, as I'm sure you've all heard by this time, one of the things that we wanted to do at the 100th podcast celebration, that was just 2 days after the 100th podcast that we put out, was we wanted to do something special for a couple of particular individuals. During our awards segment of that celebration, we awarded, of course, Adrian Thoman the Shining Star Award for being so absolutely supportive of the Nightly News Media Club and helping us out in just so many different ways that I can't even really share with you at this time. The second part was we developed the Nightly News Hall of Fame. And it was something that we really took a long time to figure out. We were sitting in a club meeting. We knew we wanted to do something nice for a couple specific individuals, but we didn't really know what exactly to do. So that led to a wide variety of different ideas and brainstorms, and we sat there for probably a good, third of our meeting trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And then Kim Musser, who fans of the podcast would know she's certainly been on in the past, she suggested, hey, why don't we do a Nightly News Hall of Fame? And Norm, since we've been in business, maybe in business isn't the right word, since we've been in existence for about 4 years, we immediately knew who we were going to induct in our first class, and that was Mr. Norm Geary. So Norm, it's such a pleasure to have you here today, and I guess the first question is, so this was all a surprise. That was another thing. Norm had no clue. I did let him know that he might be asked to speak at a certain point, but he never knew what he was getting himself into. So can you share with us your reaction because I introduced you first, can you share your reaction to what you thought about being the first inductee into the Nightly News Hall of Fame?
Deer in headlights. I was really taken by surprise because, one, I had no idea the magnitude of what that represented. And then it hit me like, wow, it's been that long. and we've come this far. So I was really surprised, but I was more, I guess the word would be overwhelmed and thankful. So I'm very thankful that I'm considered or elected to the Hall of Fame, and I hope that I can meet the challenge moving forward.
Well, Norm, I want to share with you some of the things that really went into this thought process because, listen, we have lots of people who certainly are capable of being named to the Nightly News Hall of Fame. Sherry Long, Cy Pinthong, Nick Schenkel, Christine Fusselman, Giuliani Sadeo, certainly Dylan Kleintop, who just graduated. At some point, hopefully, we'll all have this opportunity. But when we thought back to our time with the Nightly News, there's just a few things that I wanted to share with you and the audience about why you were selected. First, you were the first news correspondent and did several news episodes where you were recapping some of the important news stories that we've done, and that's actually a position I'm still seeking from our new group. Norm, you are also the first person to represent the Nightly News Media Club with the Philadelphia Phillies. And since then, and since you did such an amazing job when you were down there the first time, we have been invited to several since, and I believe have been to 3 more since. And of course, you are welcome to come with us in the future as well. That is something that we really like as a club. And again, please go search for the college series, Phillies Nights. It's really awesome. So you get in about 4 o'clock. You have about an hour to network with all of the people from the Phillies front office. And then you basically, for the following hour, get to be a part of the press conference where they all do a small, brief introduction of themselves, but all the people in attendance can actually also ask them questions. So it's like a networking hour. You get to meet them, talk to them about potential internships, learn more about their story. And we also got to meet Mickey Morandini the last time we were down, and Adam Hazley also joined us, and we got to ask him some questions. So a lot of fun, something they do multiple times a year. So I would be honored if you would go with us. But it was because of your initial what's new at the ballpark, representing the school so well, that we are continued to be invited back. You also appeared on numerous podcasts. Certainly many of our first 25 episodes you were a major part of, not only just yourself, but you were the one that was actively seeking out these interviews, booking these people to be on our show. But one of the things that I mentioned, Norm, that really, really put it over the top for me with you was your willingness to be a part of not only recognizing Nasir and being a part with us and representing the college at his funeral service, but also your assistance with the documentary that was put together and also the podcast studio dedication in which we invited Nasir's family over. I mean, if it wasn't for you, none of that would have happened, Norm. Nasir was one of the people also that you sort of mentored. Chris Ortega and Keith Goods, those names stick out to me. But you were also a mentor to many of our Nightly News Media Club members. And to be honest, Norm, you really just exemplified what it meant to be a part of the Nightly News. And so when we think back, that is why you were named the first inductee into the Nightly News Hall of Fame. So, what was it about? Obviously, you're sort of in a different situation. You would be what we would call a non-traditional student, where you returned to college as sort of the second act in your life after a very successful career in sales. You now work with the Harrisburg Senators, as well as a variety of other places locally in the Harrisburg area. But Norm, what was it about the club that drew you to it initially?
Well, when I got the call from Central Penn that they were starting a media club and getting things moving in a forward direction, and I was involved with writing, and I was an assistant editor at Hack, I said, wow, I get a chance to do this on a larger level, be able to ground floor up, work on some new projects, and possibly be able to work with a team. Not only writing, but some other projects. So It was really nice that I had an opportunity, and obviously, Professor Miller, you gave me free rein to run with a lot of projects, and I appreciated that.
Well, Norm, what was it about the mentorship aspect? Because one thing that I remember so much about you is it wasn't just about goings on, the daily, activities of the club or the weekly activities of the club, from our fundraisers to doing stories and podcasts. What was it about being a mentor for some of the younger students that really stood out to you? Because honestly, that's one of the things that I really just remember the most about you, is the impact that you had on some other club members and the profound nature that you had with them, and that I guarantee that those people will never forget you. What was it about that, being a mentor for these other students, that stood out to you and made you want to do that?
Well, being a non-traditional student and an older student, I pretty much took on the dad role on campus. Being part of the media club, I realized that we needed foot soldiers, writers, influential people on campus. So I took upon myself to mentor students and say, hey, we got a media club going on and you can play a part in it. And since you were teaching most of the classes and they were in the classes, it was an easy transition for them. And it gave me an opportunity to help them reach not only their goals and potentials, but also keep their grades up.
When you look back, I mean, again, all of this is because we got to that big number 100, which, again, it's been 3.5 years in the making, different studios, expanded studios, and really expanded roles here on campus for the Nightly News. When we first started, we were kind of just, we were under the radar. Not a whole lot of people really knew about us outside of our department. Now, everyone on campus knows who the Nightly News is. What does that mean to you, knowing that you were one of the original members of this club and what you helped to leave, the legacy that you left here at the college?
Well, it really blows me away, because I look at the vision that you had, the vision that people on campus, administrators and staff who believed in us, and to see it come to fruition and see the students actually doing some of the things that you had talked about 3 years prior to it happening blows me away.
Well, one of the things that I'm so happy to be a part of is part of the sports broadcast. And I remember having some conversations with you back then, Norm. And I got to tell you, I would be honored if you would come out and call a game with us in the spring when baseball season kicks back up. I know we're just entering the fall, so it's going to be a little while. But I really think that you would be a fantastic addition to our broadcast team if you'd come out to a game or two out in the net in Palmyra.
I'd be honored.
Well, I hope so. I know, Norm, you're a huge baseball fan. And, of course, it won't be any more this year, but probably in April, toward the beginning of the Phillies, we'll make sure you go back.
I'd be looking forward to that.
Now, Norm, I just want to talk one final question with you. When you look back at your time here at Central Penn, especially with the Nightly News, what are some of the most memorable things that even years later after you've graduated, in fact, it's been almost 2.5 years since you've graduated at this point, what were some of the events that you remember? Maybe we can reminisce a little bit.
Well, I look at when we had the NAI-CIR contest. You had put so much effort into us meeting that need, accomplishing that goal, and then finally, when it was all over and we crossed the finish line, the look on your face like, we did this. And then being able to get podcast equipment, updating different things for the club, the success of the fundraisers, and all the different things that you had mapped out for us, and accomplishing those goals, it's awesome to be a part of that. And then to see that dream still being carried on through younger students, and to see that they have the fire that we had, it blows you away.
So what Norm's referring to is we were approached by Bill Gladstone of the Bill Gladstone Group, and every time I drive by one of those signs, Norm, I look to see if his little bobblehead character is on the screen or on the advertisement. NAICIR. He approached the Nightly News, and we developed commercials around his bobblehead figures. So I would encourage anybody who wants to see these commercials. They're quite amusing, and he really got a kick out of it. We actually got some scholarships donated from that, and we actually got some money for our club budget, which has really, really helped us to expand. But yeah, you guys all did such a wonderful job. That was literally one of the most memorable things. I'm actually getting a little nostalgic because when I was going through, Norm, and did some of the best of show, I looked back at that one, and Bill was on the show. I want to make sure everybody's keeping an eye on Bill because unfortunately I heard he's been having some minor health problems, and if you see Bill out, just please make sure you let him know that you're thinking about him. Bill Gladstone's such a great friend of Central Penn College. You know, Norm, when I look back, it's hard to look back on everything that this club has done beside the Nasir Harris Podcast Studio dedication. When I think back about the nightly news, and of course it's difficult to pick just one, but when I look at the impact that these events that we've done and other things that we've done have had, that's the one that I look at, because not only was it just a gathering, it was also the culmination of a documentary project that was put together by, no, I don't just want to say Cy, it was Cy and yourself and Yuli and Chris. I mean, almost everyone in the club had a hand in that documentary, and it's still up on our YouTube channel. I do encourage everybody to watch that. And please help us remember Nasir. But honestly, Norm, his family, I'll never forget their just absolute genuine gratitude to us for recognizing Nasir. And you know, obviously we could never miss him as much as his family, and I understand that. But boy, we sure miss him a lot. And I'm just so happy that we decided. Do you remember how that all came to be?
It's hard to say because I know Nasir used to hang out outside of your office, turning in homework assignments. When we did the podcast, Nasir was very influential in doing podcast projects.
Well, he was the one that really wanted to do it from the beginning.
From the beginning.
Because we at first just had, the blog, and he had some experience coming from a previous institution. And he was all about the podcast. And he was on several of the first few. He was on number 1. And I will never forget, there was one, I was doing a presentation. He actually interviewed me, and we couldn't get into where we needed to record, so we actually had to record it on a cell phone, which it didn't sound horrible, but looking back, it was just like... But, gosh, Norm, I don't remember really how it came to be, but I know that, unfortunately, when he passed away, I know that myself, Professor Olympia, and you went down to represent the college at the funeral, and I think we all said there, like, we have to do something. That this person meant so much to not only just us as individuals, but collectively as a group. It just was so upsetting, and we miss him very much, and we were just so happy that we were able to do that. But I got to tell you, Norm, outside of that, and I think that'll probably always be at the top, the fact that this happened today. I mean, I'll never forget this. I'll never forget today as long as I live, and I hope that this means something to you, and I know it does. So I don't want to say I hope it does, because I know it does. But might this be something that you'll remember for the rest of your life today?
Not only will I remember it for the rest of my life, but every single individual that's part of the media club and those that were present will realize that this was a very important date in our lives because how far we've come, not only as a college, but as a club.
And I think that, and I look forward to another 100. Maybe we do it every 50 episodes or something like that. Maybe we have a little shindig like this. But I don't know how regularly we are going to induct people in, but I do know that there is a lot of deserving people. And I do, and I hope you're listening to this, Sherry. I feel, Sherry, I wanted to get you in so bad, but I promise you your time will come soon. Also wanted to make a note that Dr. Linda Fedrizi Williams was also inducted as part of the Nightly News Hall of Fame for her just it's not even just the podcast she's been on, because she's been on 4 different episodes, but just her accessibility, her thoughtfulness, her willingness to help us out. We share space with her, and when she came in, she very easily could have said, this is going to be my office now, and we'd like to figure out something else to do with the studio. She was the exact opposite. She asked us what we wanted to do, if we wanted to stay or go, and we obviously wanted to stay, and she has been so supportive. Just can't tell you how much we appreciate not only just the ability to continue our podcast studio, but just the willingness to be a part of it and the importance that she understands. So we also want to congratulate Dr. Linda Fedrizzi Williams for being the second inductee into the Nightly News Hall of Fame. So, Norm, before you get out of here, I just want to let everybody know, I know the baseball season's over, but next spring, I'm sure you can see Norm out at FNB Field, proudly working for the Harrisburg Senators. And of course, if you ever need to get a hold of Norm, he'll never be too far away from Central Penn College. So if everybody, next time they see Norm, be sure to congratulate him on being the first inductee to the Nightly News Hall of Fame. So, Norm, honestly, thank you so much for being a part of this event today. And my friend, and you know what? That's the thing. I'm proud to call you a friend. I never want to have that type of relationship with my students while they are my students. But boy, I'll tell you, after you're out the door, I'm proud to call you my friend, Norm.
And it's also, I'm thankful for being part of the podcast and also being a member of the Media Club.
All right. Thank you so much, Norm. All right. That's it for another episode of the Nightly News Podcast for Nightly News Hall of Fame inductee Norman Geary. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll catch you next time on the Nightly News Podcast.
This is Norman Geary, news correspondent. Thank you for listening to the Nightly News Podcast, the voice of the Knights.
Welcome back to the Nightly News Podcast. Yes, it was certainly a pleasure to hear from Norm and his genuine sincerity and really thoughtfulness on some of the things that he had to say and some of the reflections that he's had as a part of the Nightly News. As we move on, another individual who's had a significant impact on the Nightly News Media Club over the years was former Senior Deputy Attorney General John Butchar. John has appeared on a variety of podcasts over the years, sharing with us his particular insight on politics, mainly trying to get our students involved in the election process. This time, John came down the week of the 100th podcast celebration and shared his thoughts on the Democratic nomination process and some of the specific candidates who were running for Democratic nomination for president. And while this is a little dated because it was back in late August, I will say that I believe that a lot of what John has to say still applies here and certainly can be used to make an excellent opinion when it comes time for our primary elections in 2020. So we're going to go back to John Butchar, former Senior Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, talking a little bit more about the Democratic nominees for president in the 2020 primary. Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we are here today with one of our favorite guests, former Senior Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, John Butchar. John, it's always a pleasure, and welcome back to the podcast.
Good morning, Paul.
I do want to preface by saying that we are so happy to have you here. Unfortunately, within the last couple of months, you've endured a pretty serious health scare, and I must say that the Central Penn community, not only just myself, but many other fans of the show, were thinking positive thoughts from you. And I don't want to get too much more into it, but I just want to say I'm so glad you're here. So, and I'm sure you are too.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am.
So we are certainly happy that you're here. John, you're a political correspondent here for the Nightly News. You've been on the podcast. I want to say, in trying to put together the best of show previously, I want to say that you've been on at least 6 or 7 different episodes over the course of the last 3.5 years. So we appreciate your insight. Of course, as always, we try to stay as central as possible, trying to cover this in a way to not offend anybody. But we also do recognize that we are in a very important election cycle. At this point, we have seen a series of debates from the 20 Democratic candidates. So what we're going to try to do today is kind of take a step back, look at maybe analyze some of the individuals that we think have done well in the debates thus far, maybe some who haven't necessarily improved their reach, if you will, and then we might take a look at some of the specific issues that the Democratic Party is discussing in these debates. Let's start off at the top. John, what do you think, or who do you think, has improved their positioning at this point after these early rounds of debates?
Well, I do believe that those who are polling the highest have been polling the highest and have pretty much maintained that. That's Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders as really the top 4. And those people that had most name recognition, no surprise. And they have continued to be at the forefront. I haven't really seen any newbie step up and really make an effort. There have been some movement, but all of them have been involved in things that have held them back. We have the mayor of Indianapolis who has been called on the carpet for things in Indianapolis. So
one thing I will say is Buttigieg has actually stepped up and taken responsibility for some of the things he is being called out upon. So at a minimum, at least he's willing to do that, whereas a lot of the other candidates seem to kind of deflect a little bit.
That's absolutely true, except it's been keeping him from his main message. And I do see there are two main camps in the last 2 debates. There are 2 main camps regarding health care. And the last 2 debates were really all about health care. There was very little other topics covered. And the 2 debates seem to be the position espoused by Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, that what we need is universal Medicare and for everyone, cradle to the grave, and we will impose that, make that happen, and ultimately at different time frames, but over time, the private option disappear. They all have different ideas as to how soon that will be. The other camp, Joe Biden really being the biggest proponent, Kamala Harris a little bit back and forth, coming out with, no, if you have a great healthcare system that you really like, you may keep that. But we're going to also enact a Medicare type system so that everyone will have the option of health care. So those really seem to be the 2 main positions in the Democratic Party. And throughout the last 2 debates, the different parties have been attacking each other over those differences. I mean, quite frankly, I think the fact that we're talking about universal health care, whether or not you only have a Medicare type option or you have a Medicare plus a private option, I think the fact that the Democrats are talking about universal health care is a positive, for the country.
So if you had to, just again, based on the early debates, if you had to say just not even name recognition, just looking back at it, who would you say are the 2 individuals that you think fared the best and maybe improved their position, even if it's only just a little bit?
I think Kamala Harris was one in her focused attack on Joe Biden that she had well prepared. And she's an intelligent, younger government person. I mean, she's been in California for quite some time, attorney general, et cetera, held different positions.
She does let us know that in the debates, trust me.
Yes, she does. But part of the issue that I see is that I've yet to see someone in the next generation really step up and take the bull by the horns and start to take over this debate. I mean, we have an older person in the Republican Party, Donald Trump, who is there because he will support the Republican agenda. And we have several older individuals in the Democratic Party, certainly Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, two of the biggest, and with opposing views as well on the health care, are quite old. And the question is...
Bernie's even older than Donald Trump is at this point, is he not?
I believe so.
And Biden's up there as well.
Biden's right there as well. I mean, my concern is that we still have 15 months to go before the general election. There's plenty of time during which one of these individuals can have a health scare and kind of eliminate them. Or even if not, just have little slip-ups that people start to say, gee, I don't think he's as together as he was when he or she was.
Well, John, especially in the day and age of social media where everything is magnified, especially in just, we live in a soundbite culture. We live in a culture where, while I must say the first debates had relatively big ratings, there's still only less than 10% of the country watching those at any given time. Now, obviously, registered Republicans may just tune that out in general because they may feel that they're not going to vote for that person anyway and they're already dead set on Trump. But my point here is this. Because we live in a soundbite culture and people try to consume as little... in a majority, try to consume as little political information as possible, and they're getting, a 10-minute recap as opposed to watching the whole thing, I think that might be problematic in a general sense. But, all right, so you say Kamala Harris, in your opinion, improved her position. I would certainly agree. I'll tell you one thing that I kind of took away, and when I watched these debates, I was trying to go for this. I kind of voted the 3 winners and the 3 losers. I have to say that I was impressed with Joe Biden. I think that, in my personal opinion, I don't think what's best for the Democratic Party is to run somebody that's a very extreme individual, Warren, Sanders that you mentioned. I think in terms of the Democratic Party putting up any kind of offensive here, I think Biden's the one. He definitely has the background, and he's even said about the whole healthcare thing that we had a great thing going with Obamacare. Let's roll that back out and let's move with that. I was impressed with Biden. I was not impressed with Bernie Sanders. And the reason I wasn't impressed with Bernie Sanders is a lot of the direct questions. And in fact, I remember a specific question from Chuck Todd asking him to elaborate on some of his, larger grand plans. He doesn't have and hasn't really outlined specifics of these things. And it's easy to say, John, I would love to just erase all student loan debt. And that's great to say. But if you don't have a plan in place, even a preliminary plan in place for how that's going to happen, you can say whatever you want, but it's just not going to have any teeth. I also feel, and Biden made an excellent point, that he's worked with both sides of the aisles. He's passed bipartisan legislation. Do you think that that would really be what we would want for the next 4 to 8 years, to have somebody that's more moderate to be able to work with both sides? Because I have a bad feeling that if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or someone a little bit more further left would get into office, that might not be good for our country as a whole because they're just going to be fighting back and forth instead of coming together.
Well, I agree. I think Joe Biden to this point is well known. He's well respected. You may not agree with everything that he puts forth, but he doesn't have any positions that you would say are crazy or just beyond the pale of where we can reach. And some of these proposals from other candidates may be beyond what people are willing to go for. What I have found to be incredibly lacking in these debates is certainly the last 2 are virtually all about the healthcare dispute between only Medicare type plans or can you also have private plans involved? I would love to see more issues being discussed. And so far, I'm assuming as we pare down the number of participants, we're going to see some specifics and some better answers on other things. I mean, where is everyone on securing the borders and having a sound immigration policy? Democrats have been painted as the party of open borders. That means we leave our borders wide open and let millions of people stream across. And then depending on where they land, they end up in detention or split from their children or whatever. It's crazy. We need a sane policy, but we also need some way to secure the borders. And one of the things no one has talked about yet is, why do we have the border issue? Why is everybody streaming north?
The caravan, as
The
Donald
caravan,
Trump calls it.
the invasion, the caravan. And what's been lost in this so far is, why are people willing to leave their home of maybe hundreds of years with their grandparents, etc., and stream north to a place they don't know, that they don't speak the language, that they may or may not be comfortable? Why are they doing that?
Well, to avoid certain death.
Well, that's the point. I don't think the focus has been enough on the beginning, on the issue that starts. Why do these caravans exist? And part of it has to do with international financial aid and security aid and things that in the past the United States has always been willing to work with Central America on. Maybe not always for a right reason, maybe for a perverted reason, but in the past we've given these countries a great deal of support. And quite frankly, with the right kind of support and with the right kind of security support, we wouldn't have millions of people streaming north. We would always have some, because people want to come to America. America historically is an ideal place to come and set down new roots and make something of yourself. But the question is, I have seen nobody yet put forth a good, sound, reasonable basis. How do we fund these countries? How do we help them so that people can live secure in their own home, in their homes of generations, rather than feeling the need to escape? And I'd love to see that in upcoming debates. I hope the Democrats get into this, and that there's something other than we'll have millions of people streaming across the borders and then we put them in detention camps. I mean, this is just a horrible situation.
I think that one thing that I have kind of taken away from watching these debates is so we were talking off air about, what does the Democratic Party stand for? And I think that we know some of the core issues. Here's the question that I have, and here's some of the big differences between some of these candidates, is really the 0 to 100 kind of attitude. And I'll give you an example. So we talked, for example, about healthcare. So instead of incrementally making some changes, which some of the candidates have suggested, some people just want to eliminate everything, go directly to Medicare for all. We also talked about the new Green Deal, where we want to go 0 to 100. Same thing with the forgiveness of student loans. John, speaking from someone who has considerable student loans, and I'm going to be taking more out here in a few weeks when I start going back to school, I'm not necessarily for wiping them all away, but let's make some steps. How about, let's talk about refinancing or getting some of these interest rates down. That to me is where I think some of these candidates that are a little bit more far outside, not to say that they don't have great ideas, but the implementation of those ideas is just not very well developed. Even if you ask Bernie Sanders, his only, in terms of getting rid of the student loan debt, is, well, we're going to tax the higher 1% at a much higher rate. I mean, sure, that sounds great in theory, but how are you ever going to get that passed? To me, that's where some of the problem is for a lot of these candidates. They have very grand schemes, and even if they're wonderful, I think we can all attest that climate change is happening. We need to do something, but to make things revolutionary, that often doesn't work in the United States.
Well, certain things need to be done quickly. Certainly climate change, we're well behind in where we should be.
And leaving the Paris Agreement certainly didn't help.
No, it did not. We need to be in the forefront of environmental control, environmental improvement, and it's not clear how much we can, offset and stop what will be tremendous damages to the international climate. But that's something we need to take concrete steps on. We can't keep, as a country, denying that climate change isn't happening. We need to do concrete things, and that's where the Democrats certainly could do something that Trump and the Republicans are unwilling to do. Other issues may not be as universally accepted. You mentioned forgiveness of student loans. Most of us at some point had student loans. Now, some of us, like myself, they were paid off a bazillion years ago. But for other people, those who've just been paying and are just finishing up paying an enormous amount, they might be saying, wait a minute, so that person's not going to have to sacrifice and feel like they need to put forth their own money, to get their education.
$700 a month is what I pay.
So, I mean,
and that's probably low.
Yeah, and that's not universally loved. I think we need refinancing. I think we need more support programs. We need cheaper education. There's no reason why state schools in Pennsylvania are 5 times the cost of state schools in many other states. Yeah, it's all a matter of who's willing to step forward and help. I think we need trade schools. I think we need trade schools promoted because the trades are what is dying out. People are not stepping up. And a lot of the things that kids are going to school for now, to college, may not exist in just a few years. Science is changing at a much faster rate every year. So the question is, we need a sane policy as to where do we need people to work? Where do we need our geniuses to be focused? Where do we need our people with common sense and good skills to be focused on, on trades and other things that could yield them a very good living and at the same time be productive. If for a long time it was said, well, everybody would benefit by being in college. And that's true in terms of general intellectual and social development, etc. But not everybody's going to go to college and get a job that they're going to come out and immediately start working at. So I think we need a much saner, broader look at education. I've not yet heard anybody come up with something.
None. I have not even really heard that being addressed.
So, we're hearing healthcare. Should we go just Medicare type or should we include private insurance companies? But that's all I'm hearing from the Democratic side. What do the Democrats stand for? If we're not going to build a wall, how do we secure our borders? Do we help secure our borders with more financial aid to keep people safe in their own country, which is a local country? These are all, frankly, Central America is almost like our southern, vacation spots, really. Costa Rica has become a major, vacation spot area, and people have second homes there. Why not the same thing with the rest of Central America? We can do that. We can do that easier there than we can in the Middle East, where we spend an enormous amount of money. For a fraction of the money, we could help Central America secure its borders, secure its people, and give them opportunities to advance in their own societies and learn about America. And if they want to come here, that's fine, but not be forced to by threat of death.
Now, two more quick questions about our original topic. One, what is the upside to somebody who's polling at 1 or 0% at this point continuing in the race? I look particularly at someone like Beto O'Rourke. I didn't think he represented himself well. I kind of thought that the way that he spoke was very, very rehearsed. Didn't seem... I just don't think that he did very well. Polls show the same. What is the goal for him to continue with this? I don't understand that component.
I would see your Beto O'Rourke as a chance, who's someone who's looking at the future. He's young. There is going to be a need for younger blood to be leading the Democratic Party at some point. I mean, he is selling himself as, hey, I can win in Texas. If I can win in Texas, a pretty much Republican state, then I can do well for the party. I think the fact that he's not polling higher, certainly he has no chance in this election, I do not believe. But I think this is to get his name out there, to get his face out there. And I think that's really what it comes down to with a lot of these individuals who may have thought they had a shot initially, may now realize that they don't have a shot. But the more people get to see me, the more will recognize who I am. And down the road, that becomes a Joe Biden type of thing where everybody recognizes the face. So I think their motivation is to, at this point, not necessarily win this election, but to get their face and their positions out there for greater exposure down the road.
The biggest issue I had with these debates so far is again, the format was fine, but the way that the candidates just blatantly disregarded the rules, and I mean, that's to their advantage. You know, the more screen time you get, the more you have to talk about your platform. I guess I just wish that there was a better way and a more efficient way to do these debates. But frankly, I think 20 is just too many. I guess that remains to be seen. And I guess I'm looking forward to the future debates coming up with a few less people. Well, John, I think that we did pretty well. So just so you can be on the record, if you had to guess right now, who's going to be running against Donald Trump in 2020?
I believe, absent any health issues, I think it's Joe Biden.
And I would probably concur on that. He was actually kind of late to get into this. Has he ever really come out and said why that was?
No, but I don't think he was gung-ho to do this. He's been in politics a long, long time. He's been vice president of the United States. He's been held all kinds of different positions. Yeah, I think a part of him really felt like, okay, I've deserved and I've earned my time to kick back with family, etc. Because nobody is fooling anybody that the presidency is easy, that it doesn't wear on you. It certainly does. I think he was really hesitant to do it. And I think his belief that he was best qualified to beat Donald Trump, and maybe one of the very few who are actually polling in head-to-head to beat Donald Trump, I think that forced him into the election. One, he'd like to be president, but he'd like to be president, 12 or 16 years ago,
right.
Too. I mean, so I think at this point it was because I believe I have the best chance. I owe that to my party. And let's go do it and change America. We need some younger minds and younger people to step up, start to take over. And right now, I'm not seeing it.
Well, John, as always, we thank you so much, and we cannot wait. We will have you on between now and November 2020, at least a couple more times to continue to talk about this race. I think it's going to be more interesting after the primaries, of course, in 2020 to kind of get a better sense, but we certainly can continue this conversation. And John, I just appreciate your time, and you're always so insightful, and you've definitely got the background to make these types of comments, so I appreciate it. And, of course, every time I see you, you're watching the news, and you're always tuned in to things that are going on in politics, so I appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, that's it for another Nightly News podcast for today. I'm going to say a fond adieu to former Senior Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, John Butchar. John, it's always a pleasure. He's our political correspondent here, and we'll see him again soon. So for another episode, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll catch you again next time.